Hi, Albert Liu here, inviting you to join me and Rick Rule at the Electric and Battery Metals Bootcamp, April 29th, link in the description below. All right, welcome back to Rule Classroom Live, and at this time I am joined once again by Rick Rule. Rick, great to have you back. How are you doing?
I'm fine, Albert, and thank you again for causing these sessions to occur. It's nice to get fan mail as opposed to hate mail, and all of the mail I get about these sessions is fan mail, so thank you.
That's great. Great to hear. We just had a great session with Benoit LaSalle talking about Morocco and a jurisdiction that I'd never heard of. I mean, I heard of Morocco, but I've never heard about it from a mining executive and spoken about the way he did. Seems like it was kind of an unexplored gem.
Well, certainly you heard about it from a right guy. You know, Benoit has explored and produced through Africa for a very long time. We'll talk today in the interview about the importance of specific expertise. And Benoit has delivered on specific expertise for a very long time. So I'm delighted that you got introduced to a new country by a person who has a track record of success building mines in Africa.
Very good discussion. But today, what we're going to talk about is a topic you've discussed before, and it's an emphasis, especially when we enter conference season, and that is interrogating your the people who manage your investments. It's a very important thing. So why don't you set it up, Rick?
Yeah, what I'd like to talk about today is how you go about questioning companies about potential investments. And I want to stress at the beginning of the discussion, Albert, that once you get the basics down, you're going to have to ad lib. You're going to have to make the questions flow from your own interest in the context of your own discussion with the person that you're talking to. Because one of the things that you're trying to do is establish rapport from the person, from the company, so that you will be able to return to that person again and again and again, and to have them interpret press releases for you, interpret annual reports, quarterly reports, proxy statements. The phrase interrogate often implies something that is unpleasant, but the idea is to develop a personal relationship with somebody from within the company so that you can take the information from the company in a personalized and nuanced sense. So remember that this process isn't meant to be hostile. It's meant to be opening up a relationship that will be beneficial to both of you over time. I need to say, however, that this isn't entirely friendly. Remember, in the Rule Investment Classroom, we talked about the fact that of the sort of 2,000 junior mining companies that are public around the world, probably only 100 or 150, maybe 200 at the outside, are worth investing in. And so the point of this process, other than developing a contact that you will be able to use if you make an investment, the point of this is really not so much to discover companies as to throw away companies, disqualify companies that you won't need to waste your time on any longer. And I'm going to try to give you some very general tools. Remember that there's no specific real order for these questions. I'm giving them to you sort of in the way that I use, that will allow you to get a feeling for a company, to discard a company that is worthwhile, and in particular to set the stage for further and more detailed questions. Setting the stage too, I want to say that this is useful for discussions that are going to take longer than 3 or 4 minutes. One of the upcoming features that I hope we're able to introduce in the mining investment classroom is interactions with actual listings, with actual companies live, so that our audience will be able to practice what they've learned in the classroom on real companies. And as you point out, conference season is coming up, including our own conference in Boca Raton. The ability to utilize the skills that we hope you learn today in a setting like a conference has proven over 40 years to be invaluable to me. I hope that was good enough in terms of setting the stage, Albert.
Yeah, I want to ask you one thing, though. You said no particular order to the question, but I assume that you are going to order them in a way that you can eliminate, I guess, disqualify companies early?
I'm going to organize them in a way that makes sense for me. I have afterwards watched masters like Robert Friedland interrogate people, and he does things very differently. And I've come to decide that my way works for me,
Oh, I
and
see.
our listeners are going to have to find a way that works for them. So it used to be that I would call this thing 9 nosy questions and then 12 nosy questions. And I tried to organize them in a way that made sense to me. I've come to realize, Albert, sadly, that what makes sense to me doesn't necessarily make sense to everyone in our audience. And it's important that these tools get individualized for the people who are going to write the checks.
Okay, that makes sense. Myself, I think I would start by trying to learn something about the person I'm speaking with, what their position
Well,
is, what their role is, what their experience
it,
is.
it's funny that you say that. I used to ask that question 3 or 4, and I'm beginning to ask it number 1. So let's get right down to it. Remember that the process really involves, in small companies, which this discussion relates to, um, the answering of unanswered questions. We've talked about that in the classroom before. Value is added in small companies, be they technology companies or exploration companies, in shedding light, in answering unanswered questions around the key investment thesis around the company. And the whole process involves that discipline. So, one way that we might start, Albert, and it sounds like a way that's intuitive to you, and it would be friendly, is after you've allowed the company to give you their canned presentation, and by the way, do this, they're programmed to do it, you can't stop them. So, sit through the canned presentation before you enter into this, as we would call it, interrogation. But one of the things I like to do now, particularly if I don't know the person particularly well, is I say, tell me about yourself. Tell me about your professional background. Tell me about your prior successes in mining. And tell me in particular what it is about your prior successes that makes you the right choice to answer the questions at hand with regards to this company. You're looking for a couple of things, Albert. You're looking in this question for somebody who has been a success. We've talked earlier in earlier sessions about Pareto's law. It seems like you have a small group of people who are serially successful and a large group of people who are serially unsuccessful. And one of the best determinants of success in the future is success in the past. So asking this person to explain his or her past successes in mining investment goes to that question. But success, general success, isn't what we're looking for. We're looking for specific success. We are looking for experience at the task at hand. If the company that they're going to describe for you is involved in exploration for copper, gold, porphyries, or epithermal deposits in young volcanic terrain in Spanish-speaking Peru, you would like the exploration success that this person has enjoyed to be involved in a very similar endeavor. If someone has been successful operating a mine, that's very different than the skill set that is required to explore. So when asking the question, when asking them to describe their professional past and their successes, be prepared to ask a couple of follow-on questions that get specific information about their what skill sets that they have that could be useful to the task at hand. After they've answered the question about themselves, ask them about their team. Say, I realize that you're the CEO of the company or whatever it is that they are. Tell me how you selected your directors. Tell me what each director brings to the task at hand. What skill set does he or she have? Are they skilled in capital markets? Are they skilled in Peru? What is it that each director has? How were they chosen? Were they chosen just because they're friends of yours and they're likely to give you a good pay raise? You don't phrase it like that. But what you're trying to determine is that the officers and directors of the company also have specific skill sets. And particularly, you're trying to see if they were chosen by the CEO with regards to a specific plan, with regards to the task at hand. I know that when I myself interrogate a Bob Quartermain or a Lucas Lundin, rest in peace, or a Ross Beatty, and I ask them to characterize the skill sets that cause them to put people in certain positions, I get very, very specific responses. And when I get specific responses, it means that the person who is responsible for the architecture of the company has, in fact, put planning, care, attention, and love into that planning. I hope that's clear, Albert.
Very clear.
The second question now, having determined who the team is and why the team was chosen, I like to say I really enjoyed your presentation that you gave me, and I'm beginning to understand now the human dimension. My experience has been in intellectual capital businesses like Exploration that adding value, making money for your shareholders, is answering a series of unanswered questions. And I want to go to that. I got the general sense from your presentation what it's about. But what I'd like to do now is ask you to describe for me, in your own terms, what the most important unanswered question is that you propose to answer that will shed light on the asset and increase value. I need to digress here, Albert. In asking that same question over 40 years, fully 80% of the companies I've asked the question to didn't have an answer. They are telling you something very important. They don't have a plan. And if they don't have a plan, they don't get your money. If the person that you are asking the question to is of high enough caliber that he or she does have a plan, listen to the unanswered question very carefully and ask a couple of follow-on questions. One, how was that question determined? Tell me the factors that led you to ask that question. Is the question ground-truthed? Or do you think that question is something that's merely popular in the market that might cause the stock to go up? Not that having the stock go up is bad, but tell me how that question was determined. If you like the answer, first of all, tell them that you like the answer. Always praise them when you have the opportunity. It makes subsequent questions easier. If you like the answer, say, so tell me how you propose to extract the answer. What is the process by which you will test the thesis? And how long will it take? Perhaps the thesis stems from the fact that they've taken surface samples on an anomalous gold deposit, and after they took surface samples, they did some trenching to see that, in fact, the mineralization extended to depth. You will recognize this example, Albert, from earlier discussions that we've had. And so the unanswered question may be the third dimension. We know the approximate width, we know the approximate length from the trenching and the surface anomalies. We want to see how deep it goes. So the question might be, is this mineralization consistent and does it go to depth? And they might propose to answer that question based on the trenching with, 8 or 10 drill holes. And it might be the unanswered question is, does the mineralization extend to depth? Is the mineralization consistent? And does that mineralization support our target of 1 million or 1.5 million ounces? That's a very good answer, by the way, if they've ground-truthed it with trenching. Say, okay, how long will it take you to get me an answer? Do I expect this answer in 3 months? Do I expect this answer in 6 months? Do I expect this answer in 18 months? And why? Once you've got that answer, say, okay, and it's important that you get that answer. It's important. if you're expecting the stock go up, there has to be a reason for the stock to go up. And the reason that the stock goes up is because they've answered an unanswered question. If you haven't correlated the time that you are willing to hold the stock with the amount of time it gets to get an answer, the problem with your losing money isn't theirs, it's yours. You had unrealistic expectations with regards to time. So it's important that you get a sense of how much time is required to answer the unanswered question. And then the next question is critically important. How much money will it take to answer the unanswered question? Perhaps the work program will take 18 months, 2 drilling seasons in the high Andes or in northern Canada. And an honest answer to the question is, I don't really know exactly how much money it's going to take, but I suspect it will take at least $5 million. So now we know it's going to take $5 million in project expenditure, and it's going to take 18 months. We also know, or at least we can ascertain by asking the question, how much money will have to be spent on general and administrative expense to keep the company alive while you're answering the unanswered question. Maybe a well-run small company, it'll take them $1.5 million in G&A. $1 million a year for 18 months is $1.5 million. So then there's going to be $5 million that need to be spent in the ground and $1.5 million spent in G&A. So the $6.5 million. Then you say to the person, okay, it's going to require $6.5 million to answer an unanswered question. How much money do you have? Do you have enough money that you can get me to a yes answer? And if you don't have enough money, where specifically are you going to get it? If you say Haywood's going to give, if you say I'm going to do a financing, when are you going to do a financing? Who are you going to do the financing to? At approximately what price? Because that has some bearing on whether I buy it now or in the financing. Oh, well, Haywood's going to do the financing. When is Haywood going to do the financing? Who at Haywood is going to do the financing? Do you have a lead order? This doesn't need to be hostile. You just need to understand that if they can't answer the unanswered question, it's unlikely that the stock is going to go up, and it's unlikely that you are going to make money. Let's assume that we like the people. Let's assume that we like the task at hand. Let's assume that they have answered the question about where the money might come from to answer the unanswered question. The next question is, what would constitute a failure for you? When will you stop spending money? Will you acknowledge defeat? Many times in my life, Albert, somebody has proposed a $10 million drilling program. They've enjoyed no success whatsoever, but they've still drilled until all the money was gone. When after the expenditure of $3 million, they could have shut the program down, saved the $7 million, and lived to fight again another day. So a very important question is, what would constitute defeat? How will I learn that you have encountered defeat? And when will you save the rest of the money that you had intended to spend answering the unanswered question? Many companies have never considered this. And if they're dumb enough not to consider that, you need to take that into account before you invest in the stock. Assuming that you like that answer, say in your own mind, based on the presentation, you have a target of between 1 million and 1.5 million ounces. You validated part of the target with this drilling, assuming that you get a yes answer, assuming that the mineralization is reasonably consistent, of decent grade, and extends to depth. In other words, assuming that you got a yes answer in the first question, what would you suppose would be the next question that would be asked as a consequence of a yes answer this time? The answer is less important frequently because it will change based on the data that they get from the first unanswered question. What's important is that in the person's mind who is spending your money, there is a serious attempt to answer a series of unanswered questions to validate a target so that you can make a lot of money. Is that clear so far, Albert?
Yeah, just a question, Rick. So you have enough experience that when you ask a question that has some kind of numerical answer, like what is it going to cost to do this, and they throw out $6 million, you can assess on the spot whether that's a viable answer. What should the rest of us be doing? Taking notes and then going back and what would be the path for someone who doesn't have the experience, the mental references?
I'm going to talk about verification later, but you ask
Okay.
a very good question. What's important is that he or she has an answer.
Okay. My second question is, what if you feel that maybe you're talking with someone who is not the best representative, doesn't represent, I guess, the capability, the full capabilities of the company, so they don't have all the answers, and it's not because no one in the company has asked themselves those questions and had an answer. It's because the person you're speaking to just hasn't done their homework.
Well, that's very important, Albert. You write down all of the answers. It's important that you write down all of the answers. And then you say, I would really like to learn more about this. I am very, very, very interested in this. Who else in the company can I talk to? What you'll find, many of our listeners, Albert, will assume that the CEO of the company is too important and too busy to talk to them, which is untrue. A good CEO doesn't have a life other than his or her company. And far from being hard to talk to, a good CEO is hard to shut up. So when you believe that you won't have access to them, that is very, very, very untrue. If you have proven in discussions, as an example, with the IR person, that you are a serious investor, that you're asking intelligent questions, and as a consequence, you are likely to invest what is, at least for you, serious money, there is a probability, rather than a possibility, that you will be able to be referred to the CFO, the Chief Exploration Officer, or the CEO. And I would start with the CEO. It's important that you wrote down the answers that the IR person gave you, because it's important that the answers that the CEO gave you track. If there's a material variation between the business plan, the financials, the resumes, between various people in the company, there are only two interpretations. One is that somebody lied, and the other is that somebody is stupid. And neither of those are good outcomes. So it's very important that you attempt, if you're talking to more than one person, to have the information that you got track. As a sidebar, Albert, there's nothing I've enjoyed more on field trips than having the whole staff of a mining company, or at least the staff that's present at the mining company, present when I ask questions. And I'll often start off by talking to the exploration guy, the geologist. While I'm talking to the geologist, I'm keeping my eye on the engineer, the guy who has to build the mine. And more times than I can count, I have watched the engineer become visually uncomfortable with the representations made by the arm waver. It doesn't mean that they aren't both right, but what it means is that I need to ask some qualifying questions of both parties. And if you have the opportunity to ask similar questions of two people within a company, it's very important that the answers that they give you, at least in some measure, track.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay?
Yeah.
So we're there with that. The next question goes to capital acquisition, because this is a capital intensive business. If you don't have competitive advantages in capital acquisition, you're at a disadvantage compared to all your peers. So you say to them, just as you have to have a plan to answer the unanswered question, you have to have a plan to acquire the capital to answer subsequent unanswered questions. You have given me a presentation that I think is a good presentation, and you have acquitted yourself well in the questions that I've asked you. But obviously, it's not in my interest to be the last person that you tell the story to, because you aren't going to get all of the money that you need from me. Tell me who your target audience is. Tell me why they are your target audience. Are they your target audience because they've been core investors in prior activities? Are they your core, are they your target audience because you think that audience is particularly suited to funding the task that you have at hand? Is your audience an institutional audience? Is it a high net worth retail audience? Is it a Canadian audience? Is it an American audience? Once you have told me who your audience is, tell me how your method for telling the story is tailored to that audience. I don't want you to regurgitate a pitch. I want you to customize a pitch to the audience at hand. Tell me how you're going to do that. And tell me, too, as specifically as you can, how you're going to reach that audience. I want a capital raising plan from you. If you are a Canadian issuer, do you have a foreign issuers exemption in the United States? Remember that the United States market is 10 times the size of the Canadian market. The Canadian market is overserved for natural resource businesses, and the American market is underserved. If you don't have a plan to access the U.S. market, you don't tell the company this, but if they don't have a plan to access the U.S. market, they're dumb. Ask them what the plan is to facilitate trading, either institutional or retail, in the U.S. If you have an institutional audience, is it a generalist audience? Is it an audience of mining money managers? Is it an audience of mining companies? And what experience do you have accessing any of these audiences? Because the experience that you have in raising capital in aftermarkets is the experience that allows you to efficiently raise the capital that you will need to answer unanswered questions. With me still?
Yep.
A question that I love to pose after I've done all that is, listen, I'm really interested in this. I am highly likely to become a shareholder, and I'm not going to be a convenient shareholder. I'm going to keep asking questions. Who's buying the beer? Who is going to be my contact in the company? Who is going to answer my questions? Who is the person that, they're not going to give me inside information, but who is the person who's going to deliver to me the nuance around the press releases that I might not understand? Who is the person that's going to explain the compensation plan to me? Who got stock options in what quantity and how much? Who is the person that is going to relay to me as gently as they can that the answer to the unanswered question is no, and what the fallback position is? The right answer, of course, is that either the person that is talking to you says, I am going to be your contact, I'm buying the beer, or they say, this is the person and I'm going to facilitate the introduction, or I'm going to be your quarterback and I will answer the questions I can, but I will obtain answers for you from people inside the company who are more qualified to answer than I am. Wonderful answer, you say. Thank you for that. In the course of asking these questions, I'm talking to the company person now. I say to them, in the course of asking these questions, it occurs to me that I've spent an hour studying this company and you spent 3 years putting it together. I want you to tell me the 3 things about this company, about answering the unanswered questions, that keep you up at night. I've learned in my life that if I don't know the 3 most probable things to go wrong, I don't know enough money. I don't know enough to invest the money. Tell me the 3 things that bother you the most, and tell me what you're doing right now to ameliorate my risk associated with 3 things that can go wrong. It is a very bad circumstance when the person that you are asking that question of can't answer it. It either means they're lying or they haven't considered it. And neither of those alternatives makes them a good steward of your money. Having gotten through that question, you say, thank you very much. That was really illuminating. Now, if you could tell me 2 or 3 questions that I forgot to ask, I've asked you questions that are based on my general knowledge around mining and my aspirations as a speculator. But clearly, there are things that you know about the company that are important that I don't know because you've lived the company and I'm just experiencing it. Tell me two or three things that I didn't ask that I should have asked or should ask in the future. The final question, and I love this, is you've been very candid, and I really appreciate that. I've really learned a lot in this session. It's my habit to codify what I have learned in written notes so that I can revisit those notes a month from now or at some point in time when the share price falls to solidify in my mind why I own the company and to give me the patience and the perseverance to hold it for longer. If I codified these notes and sent them to you, would you give me some sense yourself as to whether they were accurate and perhaps even sign off that my understanding is consistent with yours? And when you ask that question, watch their face. This is not meant, Albert, to be an exhaustive list of questions to ask a company. This is meant to be a screening tool. This is meant to introduce you to somebody who can be an ally around your investment for a very long period of time. This round of questions is meant to cement your understanding of the basics of the company and serve as a basis to ask more questions now or at a later date. But I guarantee that any of our listeners who ask these questions, particularly in conjunction with the lessons that they've learned in the classroom, will avoid many more mistakes than they otherwise would make without a systematic program of interrogation.
Rick, I want to ask a question about, I guess, how you open this, and that is, a good CEO will spend time with you, will answer your questions. Because we got a question from, or just a comment actually from Jean, who says, several companies, the IR management have not responded to her personal inquiries by email, and that, she's reluctant to invest in companies that don't take her seriously. I think on the one hand, is it unrealistic for someone to expect a regular retail investor to get the same treatment that someone with your profile and your influence would have? So that's one part of the question. And then the second part is maybe email is not the best way to interact with the representative, just because all of us get flooded with so much digital solicitations. Maybe they just don't see it on the surface as a serious inquiry, and then it falls through the cracks because of that.
I, by now, prefer to initiate a call. By the way, I like calls, but I prefer to initiate it by email. And I prefer to initiate it by saying, I'm a fairly serious investor, and I have a genuine interest in your company, but I don't know enough to invest. And in addition to going through your filing statements, which believe me, I will do, I want to establish a relationship with a living, breathing human being who knows enough about the company to give me an annotated tour of that. If you don't get a response, what it means is that the company isn't serious about capital acquisition. And the person whose job it is to respond to that inquiry isn't a passionate human being. And I suspect that if you give a company a couple chances to respond and they don't, that they've responded. They aren't worth your while. Thousands of people have told me over time, Albert, you can expect an answer to these questions, Rick, yourself. But we can't. I have watched over 35 years the serially successful entrepreneurs, the Robert Friedlands, the Bob Quartermains, the Ross Beatties, the Lucas Lundins, the Adolf Lundins, the Adam Lundins, sit at an investment conference and talk to retail shareholders until they literally exhausted the retail shareholders. The serially successful entrepreneur does not want to talk about hockey. They don't want to talk about politics. They don't want to talk about gardening or movies. They want to talk about the passion in their life, which is their company. And if they don't have that passion, it is less likely that they can succeed. You may have to stimulate that passion. You may have to prove that you yourself are a passionate and interested observer, that you aren't talking to them to talk about hockey or politics, but rather in anticipation of investing. But if you're talking to them in anticipation of investing, you are validating what they're doing for a living. You are validating their passion, and they will, in every case, be grateful.
I've got a question from Anonymous, handles Anonymous. And it has to do with asking people about failures. I had a similar question, so I'm going to just combine them together. You had one of your questions is, what are you going to define as a failure, and then what are you going to do? When are you going to quit? If you're dealing with an experienced person, they must have these failures in their resume. They must have had that life experience already and a track record that you can consult. Maybe it's publicly available what they've done in those situations, or you can just ask, as our member in the chat session is recommending.
Well, that's a question I often ask. When I've asked somebody to describe their successes in mining, particularly successes appropriate to the task at hand, I also say, I've been informed almost as much by my failures as my successes. Can you point to some life lessons that you've learned that will help you be a better steward of my capital in this circumstance? And if you ask that question of, say, a Bob Quartermain, an honest guy, he'll say, "Oh God, they're too numerous to mention, but let me try 2 or 3 important ones."
Yeah, Ross Beatty too.
Yep.
Very humble. Yeah. Okay. Rick, what questions have we not asked you that would be appropriate at this time as we start to wrap this up?
I think it's important that you keep your demeanor in this conversation friendly, not hostile. You're not trying to foreclose on somebody's house. You're not assuming that they're a gangster trying to separate you from your money. I think that you need to present the persona of an interested, positive investor who is hoping that they get the information that will allow them to invest in the company. It's important to speak slowly. It's important to smile. It's important to praise the questioner, the person that you're questioning, if they give you a good answer. It's important, too, if you don't get a good answer, to say, "Listen, you piece of shit." It's important to say, "Perhaps I didn't phrase that question correctly. The information that I'm looking for is this, and I don't understand from your answer how that relates to the question that I was attempting to ask." In other words, assume in the near term the blame for misinformation so that you don't poison the process for the rest of the questions.
Yeah, that's good advice. I think something I would add is that if you want to be courteous, attend the person's talk if you're at a conference. Take notes there and go to the breakout session. There's a good chance a good CEO is going to answer a lot of those questions in their talk, and then you can just move on to the next stuff.
And certainly use that to flatter them.
Right.
I am here because I really enjoyed your general session presentation.
Yeah.
And I have heard background chatter about you through the conference, or if you're calling the company. I'm calling because in some senses, your reputation and your company's reputation precedes itself. I've heard about you from Rick Rule. I've heard about you from Doug Casey. Now I want to talk to you myself. It's important, to the extent that you can, that you start the conversation off on a good note. If you start the conversation off on a hostile note, the other party is going to be looking to protect themselves rather than give you the information that you need to make an investment decision.